The COP30 UN Climate Summit is well underway in Brazil at the home of the world's largest tropical rainforest. Heads of state and government from nearly 200 countries are in attendance. The gathering has been billed as a vital opportunity to turn previous commitments into practical steps to reduce planet warming emissions.
At COP30, let's renew the great promise the world made a decade ago in Paris, by kick-starting a new decade of implementation and acceleration.
This process has made a difference. 15 years ago, the world was heading for 4 degrees of global warming. Now it's heading for somewhere around 2.5 degrees. Is that enough? Have we made enough progress? No, but it is progress.
Among those present at the COP30 summit is the Scottish climate researcher and campaigner Laura Anderson. Laura, what's the mood at COP30?
Well, of course, there is a lot of anticipation before these COP conferences. It is the beginning of 2 weeks of negotiations on a very important topic of climate change. There's a lot of excitement. Definitely, President Lula of Brazil definitely injected a lot of energy into this COP, saying that it should be about truth and about action. But of course, we know that anything can happen in the next 2 weeks, but there is definitely a mixture of excitement, a bit of anxiety, trepidation maybe even, but we are ready to go forward with these negotiations and hopefully commit to some real action globally on climate change.
And it's in a very distinctive place. This isn't in a well-serviced area by any manner of means.
This is in Belém, Brazil, which is the heart of the Amazon. Partly it's here to shine a light on what we are trying to protect, nature, the lungs of the planet, which is the Amazon rainforest, but also to recognise that there are communities, indigenous communities and rural communities that should be part of these negotiations. It hasn't been the easiest to get to, which I guess is something that we need to consider, but this is where we are hosting it this year, and it is definitely a different flavour of COP conference than we have ever had before in the previous 29 conferences.
So what are the key issues that are being discussed?
The first key issue is around climate finance. It is ensuring that we bridge the gap when it comes to providing the financial support for countries to both look after their green economy but also adapt to climate change. We are looking to get to about $1.3 trillion by 2035, but currently we only have about $300 billion on the table. So getting countries like the UK and other rich, well-developed nations to put forward money is something that is on the agenda. And we also want to see more climate action. Countries every 5 years have to produce their NDCs, their nationally determined contributions, which are basically climate plans of how they're going to reduce their emissions. And that is absolutely something on the agenda. And of course, there are always fringe issues. A big one here has been about rainforest protection and even issues like frequent flyers and how we can tackle that. But the big two are climate action and climate finance. Key part of this, though, is that President Trump isn't there, President Xi of China isn't there, Prime Minister Modi of India isn't there, all the big emitters. Is that making a difference? It definitely makes a difference in the beginning. It's disappointing when world leaders or high-level delegations do not turn up, but we still progress on without them. And certainly the tone has been, especially in relation to America, it is 194 to 1. We still have 194 countries that are really here to commit to this process, and we will move on without them. And I know that China absolutely is a country that we need to pay attention to. It is the world's largest emitter, but it is also the fastest growing green economy. It's about 10% of their GDP. They are world leading when it comes to solar installation, as an example. And so even though their president might not have been here, they are absolutely still here pushing forward the climate agenda. And as I said, there are all the other countries in the United Nations here and present. And for us in the UK, we know that we have had Prince William, we have had Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband, and we also have Climate Minister Katie White. And from Scotland, we have Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin. So there is definitely a response from the UK and from Scotland here alongside the other delegations. Does anything you're hearing suggest a breakthrough on the 1.5 degrees centigrade target? That is definitely something that is on the agenda. 10 years ago in 2015, when it was COP21, we had the Paris Agreement, which was the first legally binding time countries together came to commit to bringing warming down to around 1.5. We know that we have reached that tipping point and that we stand on a precipice, but we know that we have been bringing the emissions and the global warming targets down since that 10 years. But this is absolutely a time to take stock of where we are at. And I think the President of Brazil was very clear in his opening speech that this has to be a time for truth and action. And so it is a really pivotal moment for scientists to make sure that we keep that within reach. And we are still waiting on a few countries to put forward their climate emission reductions plans. But it is definitely something that is still within sight. And we've definitely not lost hope for that 1.5 degree arrangement.
Some people, particularly were engaged with COP from COP26 in Glasgow. And arguably, that didn't deliver what was expected. And some people might be a little cynical about it now, or sceptical, certainly. Do you understand that? And can you see that people aren't going to buy into this?
I do. And look, let's even address the fact that this is COP30. There have been 29 previous attempts and negotiations at multilateralism to achieve this. And I can absolutely see why people say that it is something that maybe is not working. But we are absolutely better off having the COP process than without it. And if we did not have the COP process, we would be on a much starker trajectory for global warming. And part of the reason that I'm here is not just because I'm an environmental scientist and campaigner, but I'm also an ambassador for a charity called Tearfund, who work in communities all around the world that are being devastated by climate change.
Laura Anderson, Brazil, thank you for joining us in Scotland tonight.